Brianna Patch. I am a 33-year-old conversion copywriter focusing on being funny in copy and building relationships through humor. And I'm a much better human than I used to be. It feels good to be able to say that.
Feels good to be able to say that, sure. I don't know if many people start off that way, you know?
I don't think so.
Wonderful, wonderful. They might. I mean, that's the goal, right? To get to that point of I'm a much better human.
Yeah.
But be able that's a good way to start everything. So where does your story begin, Liana?
I think it technically begins around like age 12 or 13, which was when I got hellaciously depressed, sort of spurred by my first breakup. I lost my first love. And unfortunately, this person also lived with my family. And so I could not get away from this pain. And just dealt with depression, anxiety, a little like eating disorder light throughout my adolescent years. Went to therapy on and off the whole time. And then finally, in the early months of 2021, saw a great psychiatrist who was like, you fit the criteria for borderline personality disorder.
Interesting.
And I had asked for this diagnosis because I read a book by Marsha Linehan, who's the creator of dialectical behavioral therapy. Yeah. I read her autobiography and I was like, oh, wow, this is me. This is everything that happened to me.
Yeah.
And so that like made a lot of sense to me. And for a minute, I felt like this diagnosis was, stigmatizing and horrible because you read all the stories about people with borderline who never find happiness and they have tragic ends. And then on the other hand, it was very validating because it was like, there is a specific flavor of sort of existential agony, and you're not alone. Our favorite message as copywriters.
Sure, right.
Yeah. So that was like, okay, I have a name for it. It doesn't feel great. I have to stay on this planet, even if I don't want to. So I have to figure out a way to want to stay on the planet. And that was basically all of 2021 for me.
So, and when you say like, I mean, like you're not alone, like it's my favorite cliche saying too. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Having that diagnosis and that, validity, can you explain like what like feelings you go through, like seeing that? Cause I could see that I could be the same. I could see myself being the same way, that it's like, well, that's great, but that like, I'm still stuck with that and just kind of furthering down the hole there. But
yeah,
what thoughts, what feelings, what emotions went through you with that one?
I think it was just reading this book by this person who I really respected and resonating with a lot of what she was discovering in the story, and seeing if someone can suffer this much and reach a point of relative contentment and peace, I probably can too. Yeah. And like, she did the work to lay it all out in this therapy modality and maybe explore that. And then I looked for other stories. There's a book called The Buddha and the Borderline. There's a lot of, I think, Buddhism. There's a lot of Buddhism in DBT, but there's a lot of borderlines, I want to say, who find Buddhism.
Sure, yeah.
Because there's space for the dialectic. There's space for like the worst parts of you and the parts of you that want to be better. Yeah.
Did you walk backwards then? Like, so here you are, bringing the story to like, age 12 and the anxiety and depression that goes from there. Did you kind of walk backwards after that and go, okay, well, let's take that moment and that explains this moment, or it doesn't? Or did you not even go backwards at all once you found out?
I went through the whole sort of like, it makes so much sense knowing that, it's not just a tendency to depression or anxiety. It's this very particular flavor of like lack of emotional skin. Like you just feel like one big raw exposed nerve all the time.
Yeah.
And that is partially what makes me really good at my job, because I'm very empathetic and I can like write to what people are feeling easily. Yeah. And it's also a heavy burden because things really get to me. Like can't watch horror movies, can't. certain times of the month, can't even watch sad commercials. um, just being a highly sensitive person and realizing that like that was the reason that I've suffered so much, not because I'm inherently bad, but because I didn't have the tools to understand and manage my experience.
And that's, and that's even tougher. I mean, forget about, the fact that you have this breakup and this thing that happens to you at that age. It's just that age alone, right? Where you're trying to figure out everything changing, right? At all at the same time. And here it is, like, it's like an additive of like, I can't explain it anyway because I'm going through, like, adolescence, and nobody's giving me the tools to describe it. But then on top of this, for you, here's this explanation, which you only find out later, as far as that goes.
Yeah.
What do you think would have been a benefactor for you had you known about this, like at that age, that we don't really see at this point? Like now it's like, yeah, that's just a terrible time of your life, is, adolescence, and that's it. But there's a lot more that could possibly go along with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many therapists who are sort of loath to diagnose BPD because it is really stigmatized, and for a lot of people, that stigma hurts, right?
Yeah.
It harms more than it helps. And even my therapist was like, "You fit the criteria. I won't officially like, I'm not going to say that you are this or are
Interesting.
not, but you fit the
Yeah.
criteria." And I was like, "Okay, I appreciate that sort of light touch, but I think it would have been nice to have that light touch when I started sort of emotionally crashing, in early adolescence, and then to be shown some actual therapeutic tools,
Yeah.
like something as simple as meditation or deep breathing. It was really just only talk therapy, and
Yeah.
that can only help so much because if you are
Sure.
on your own, trying to manage your experience however you can, which for me was self harm, like, yeah, I
Yeah.
wish that baby Leanna could have gotten some more tools.
Was that quick to like to because it sounds like you started talking about, like, going to therapy like very early on. Like, did that happen because everybody was like, well, I don't know what to do, and let's have somebody else figure it out? Or was that, truly your support system? Or what, better yet, I mean, what did your support system look like?
My support system was my parents who just could not really figure out why I was so sad. And
Yeah.
I didn't know either. And so, they were good parents and they tried to get me resources to help me. But uh, I think it's so hard to pick a therapist for yourself that it's got to be even more impossible to pick
Well,
one for your kid.
yeah.
So they found one who I got along with and figured like good enough. And I'm sure she did a good job too, but there were limits to her knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where you are with it, even, today, or, start from, when you had that diagnosis, what did life look like after that versus like before? Like
Uh,
when you walked out of the therapist's office and gave you that light touch there, where did your brain kick into, and what does your story look like after that?
I definitely went into research mode. I was like, okay, what does this look like in all ways for everyone?
Yeah.
What else can I identify with? Reddit is a treasure trove, but also a dangerous place to spend time in the BPD subreddits.
Yeah.
Um, so it was research mode, and then it was like, okay, I don't really believe that group therapy is going to help, but I also am at a point where I have to try something
Yeah.
because what I'm doing isn't working well enough or fast enough. And I just, I think it's a cliche, and I wouldn't say I like totally surrendered, but I just sort of had to look at myself and be like, well, I'm going to try something radically different, and I'm going to do some intensive outpatient therapy over Zoom because it was COVID, uh, and let my work take a back seat for the first time ever, and ride my bike a lot. And having this diagnosis gave me like a new lens to
Yeah.
see my own thoughts. It's
Yeah.
really helpful to be able to step back and watch yourself think and react
Sure.
to things.
Absolutely.
And it gave me a little bit more empathy for myself because I've always been pretty judgmental, pretty harsh with myself. Like, why can't you just be better? Uh, and then it's like, well, maybe there's a reason that
Yeah.
you, whatever it is, biopsychosocial, however you regards it, whatever the reasons that cause this particular emotional condition. It was just that added sort of layer of removal,
Yeah.
be a little bit more patience and kindness, and to do, I think I did 3 weeks of therapy, which was 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. And then it was supposed to be a 6 week thing. And then I got impatient with the quality of some of the sessions, and with the therapist who was assigned me. And so I
Interesting.
to switch, and they were like, you can't switch. That's part of the therapy. And I was like, well, I understand that, but this
Yeah.
person's totally untrained and doing more harm than good. So,
Oh gosh.
so I took what I needed and left.
So it sounds like though, like, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you were almost like pretty accepting. Like it was kind of like you were waiting for that, like somebody to give you a name to what you were struggling with, or am
Yeah.
I
It was a
not?
relief.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not just bad in some mysterious way. And of course, like, if you live in the world long enough and you observe the world long enough, you know you're never the first person to experience anything. So I didn't
Sure. Right.
first person to, to experience emotional pain. Um, but it was nice to know, like, oh, this
Yeah.
is actually a thing. This is a real thing.
Yeah. Like you can hear it, like, and I don't, like you said, I mean, I don't know if everybody else is like that too. I mean, certainly could see people walking out and feeling complete opposite. And it's just like, well, that, I guess life is over at this point, because you could
Yeah.
go down the dark road of, like you said, people with this diagnosis is like, they're never happy, or they're never, have a chance to feel things appropriately, and things of that nature. What, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I was lucky in that I had already sort of been doing some of the relevant work and
Yeah.
practice, through meditation on and off for years, and reading, Buddhist Dharma books and things like that. So I think I was in a better place to
To receive
accept
it.
that, and
Yeah.
not feel like it was a death sentence. And you'll see a
Yeah.
lot of people, like, who just got diagnosed in their 30s, post on the BPD subreddit, like, I feel like this is the end of my life. And then a bunch of other people who are like, actually, it's the beginning.
Yeah.
Congratulations, welcome.
Why do you think that is? Or do you think that's unique to, BPD, or not?
I don't think it's unique to BPD. I think, any mental health condition that really affects your day to day function and your overall emotional stability
Yeah.
probably has that reaction.
Yeah.
But because BPD is, like, shown in movies and films and books as, like, this crazy psycho
Yeah.
woman who's gonna destroy your life, for love. It's not great.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like, you're not the first person actually in past 2 weeks, to have that diagnosis. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear, I mean, the similarities of the fact that that's what you're contending with,
Mhm.
is that you've got such a stigma to it, and such a, I don't want to say like newness to that, but it's certainly not the ones that we glamorize, right? The anxieties and depressions, and it's certainly not the ones that, like, you hear about the extreme end of the scale, so
Mhm.
it's kind of been under the radar, yeah, so to speak, I guess,
Yeah.
and so, like you said, I mean, when you hear it now, it's, whatever image pops into your head, and unfortunately that's what people get, you
Yeah.
know.
When it's
Um,
untreated and I don't think it even has to be diagnosed. It's just
no,
tools work to make every single person better, happier, more patient, kinder. Like,
yeah,
I don't even need to say just BPD people,
yeah,
use this.
and what it sounds like you've got given yourself, and then just kind of reaffirmed, is that here's the skills and here's the tools that I need to manage it. And I mean, like you mentioned several times here, just the Buddhist philosophy. What parts of it kind of stood out from you in the beginning, that have carried you along to keep that being in your, set of tools to manage this?
Uh, I mean, just the practice of mindfulness really helps because it gives you that split second of like, oh, I'm feeling a thing instead of I am this thing that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Um, but also, you know, the idea of dialectics that I mentioned, that multiple things in opposition can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
You can be a person who is in deep emotional pain and really good at your job, and you can have deep friendships and also a deep fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
You know, and there's space for all of that, which is kind of a relief. One of the other things that is not really, it's kind of opposite to most Buddhist tenets that I'm aware of, but the idea of a sense of self. That's something that a lot of people with BPD struggle with, and I
Struggle.
definitely
Yeah.
did because I've always sort of thrown myself into relationships and
Yeah.
let other people define me by what I accomplished, which isn't great because then at the end of the day, like, who are you?
Where are you?
Um,
Yeah.
and so I was sort of working on that. And I remember one art therapy session in my outpatient program. You know, we had to draw like a full body self portrait and we had to uh, write down our best qualities and where they might reside in our body. And of course, there's part of me that's like, this is the dumbest thing ever. This is so a child. And then anytime you get me drawing, I'm just like immediately into it. So it's like, oh, this is great, love it. And then I found myself referring back to that page in my notes, you know, multiple
Constantly.
times.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Was it just like that much out of your zone of, like you said, like I can't do this. This is silly. This is a kid thing. All this. Do you think it's for that reason, or why do you think something like that stuck?
I had already worked with a really great business coach who forced me to acknowledge my accomplishments when they happened.
Yeah.
And so it felt like more of that practice where it's like, actually, you're fine. Actually, you're doing well. Actually, there's nothing wrong with you. And if you write down all of the things that are good about you, they far outnumber the bad.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. And it's something about writing it down and having it there uh, really makes a difference because it's
Yeah.
not always available in your head.
No, right? Or, you can't see it very clearly,
Yeah.
being able to access that is a totally different thing. And
Yeah.
when we talk about, things like meditation and mindfulness all the time, just as a good practice, but I think it's when you hear it actually apply to, a specific situation versus just, oh, this will make you, less stressed for all of life. Like, then it kind of makes sense. It kind of sinks in that, oh, this is what that means,
Yeah.
as far as giving you your space, like you mentioned, or finding that moment to actually just like feel, and this is what that
Hmm.
feeling is, good or bad. you
Hmm.
know um
Yeah.
yeah. What would you say then, given all this information, and I mean certainly unique in my opinion, as far as kind of walking out and being gung-ho? I feel like people, you do that with like a diagnosis of cancer or something like that, there's always one member of your family that it's like, okay, dad has this, like, I'm going to research everything and read every book. But we don't always hear that, I feel like, when it comes to, mental health.
Yeah.
It's just like immediately, well, great, like, um I'm just going to be depressed then for the rest of my life. Like, is that what you just told me just now? Or I've got this thing that's going to make everybody cringe. What's been kind of that guiding light then, as far as keeping you moving forward and not necessarily being completely sucked backwards, because that's certainly going to happen altogether. But what's been the biggest piece of advice that's kind of keep you going?
Uh, I think a big thing for me was realizing how much of my own agony I was prolonging by uh, living in the past
Yeah.
and regret and mistakes. And I've always been like a science person. My mom's a neuroscientist. And so learning that like neural pathways are reinforced by the same thoughts over and over, and that if I was going to get better, I had to make some new pathways.
Yeah.
That was a big thing for me because every time uh, I would, I felt myself sort of slip back into regret, or, I would stay up all night thinking about mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
And not just little mistakes, giant life ruining, life altering mistakes that affected me
Yeah.
and people. Um, I had a bunch of post-it notes around my house at this period of time. And one of them said, you're changing your brain. It takes time.
Like it.
You're building new neural pathways. I had that among like Buddhist mantras and reassurances from therapists, and I joined a sangha that met every week. So it was like, okay, for some reason, having a science basis helps me believe more that I'm doing something, that I'm
Yeah,
changing. Yeah.
I like it. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that.
Thanks for inviting me.